Well, can you hear me all okay? You all right with the TV cameras there? Thank you for this, the good turnout here. I appreciate this. I'm joined by Minister of Labour and Immigration, Jason Copping, and Parliamentary Secretary for Labour and Immigration, Mohamed Yassin. How are you, Mohamed?
Very well.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And Jason, I saw you earlier today.
Yeah, earlier today.
Great, well, good to see you. So, friends, this evening we will be launching the Government of Alberta's consultations on a new Alberta immigration strategy, the Alberta Advantage immigration strategy. This is something that our government committed to in our platform in the spring election, Alberta Strong and Free. This was the first election platform in Alberta history to include as a major section on immigration reform. As you know, our government has already begun meaningful action on promoting fairness for newcomers with respect to foreign credential recognition and assessment. I want to thank Minister Copping and Parliamentary Secretary Yassin for having helped ensure the passage of Bill 11 through the legislature, the Fair Registration of Professional Practices Act, which is the legal framework to speed up and simplify the process of professional and trade credential recognition, to make it easier for foreign trained professionals, for immigrant professionals to get to work at their skill level in Canada. And I want to thank my colleagues for having led consultations all through the summer on the implementation of that new law, because it's a multifaceted process. I've spoken to many of you about that. We will be having, by the way, on that score, a Premier's Summit on Fairness for Newcomers. We haven't scheduled it yet, but I think early next year is the goal.
That's the plan, yep.
Yeah. But today we're launching something quite different. Today we're launching our public consultations on the Alberta Advantage immigration strategy that we spoke to in the platform. In the platform, so let me just say, the goal of the Alberta Advantage immigration strategy is to have an Alberta immigrant nominee program that works well for Alberta, for jobs, growth in the economy, and works for newcomers. A Alberta immigration plan that works fast, that connects newcomers with available jobs, and that ensures that we are attracting people with the kind of skills that we need to build a prosperous Alberta in the future. Immigration can and must be a tool for economic growth and job creation. It can't just be about bringing people here to add to the population for the sake of it. Although there can be some advantages, we need the right kind of people with the right kind of skills at the right time in the right communities for maximum bang for our buck when it comes to economic benefit from immigration. That's the task I've assigned Minister Copping and Parliamentary Secretary Yassin in these consultations as they develop the Alberta Advantage immigration strategy. However, the platform does already give our government some specific ideas for that strategy, 4 specific new streams within the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program that we will be developing through these consultations. Now, I stress that these 4 streams are not exclusive. That is to say, they are the beginning, not the end, of the new immigration strategy for Alberta. Those 4 streams include a rural entrepreneur immigration program that will invite entrepreneurs to start new businesses in smaller Alberta communities. This is because there is a what's called a succession crisis in many rural community businesses, where because of declining or stagnant population, many business owners are at or past retirement age. They cannot find local buyers for their rural businesses. And yet there are many prospective immigrants who would be interested in coming to Canada, buying those businesses, operating them in those smaller communities, helping to revitalize the economies of rural communities and smaller cities across Alberta. My starting point is we have enough people in Calgary and Edmonton at about 1.3 million apiece. We don't have enough people in many of the smaller communities. The whole reason the federal government gave Alberta and other provinces the provincial nominee programs was to get a better geographic distribution of immigrants across Canada. And the whole reason we're looking at programs like this is to get a better geographic distribution of immigrants within Alberta. And that is why I say without apology, we believe there should be, we want to tie newcomers to great business opportunities in many rural communities. And I believe that often new Canadians, new Albertans, integrate more quickly and successfully in smaller communities because they are welcoming, there's opportunities, they get to know people more quickly where necessary, their English language skills improve more quickly, as opposed to getting lost and falling between the cracks sometimes in the metropolitan cities. Second stream that we have identified will be the Rural Renewal Immigration Program that would prioritize Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program applications from foreign nationals who are committed to living and working in smaller communities throughout Alberta. Now, we are not suggesting that we will only take applications for people headed for rural Alberta, and I'm going to be looking to these gentlemen, based on the consultations and the input we received, on how to get the right balance. Manitoba has probably the most developed and most successful immigrant nominee program in Canada, and they have about 30% of the permanent residents coming through that program, establishing themselves in rural communities. So that's an interesting rule of thumb or point of reference for our government as we more strongly emphasize rural immigration does not mean excluding the cities, but getting more people to move outside of them. Third mainstream, the International Student Entrepreneur Program will encourage foreign student graduates of Alberta post-secondary institutions to start a business and stay in Alberta permanently. And so we hope to offer them there's a power that Alberta has not been using to nominate people for a temporary resident visa as part of our immigrant nominee permanent residency program. And so we want to explore with the federal government nominating foreign student grads of Alberta post-secondary programs for a bridging visa, a temporary resident visa or work permit, so that they can then apply for this student entrepreneur program if they intend to start a business in Alberta. So for me, almost the ideal immigrant from an economic point of view is somebody who's come here as a foreign student. They've obtained their degree or diploma from an Alberta institution that will be recognized as such by every employer. They will have no credential recognition challenges. Their English language skills will have improved where relevant at the Alberta University or college. They will have become more familiar with Canadian culture and find it easier to integrate, understanding the kind of social context of the Canadian workplace. And if they want to stay here and start a business here, we want to keep them. And that's the goal behind the International Student Entrepreneur Program. The fourth and final stream that we have identified in our platform is the Foreign Graduate Startup Visa Program that will target brilliant foreign student grads of top universities in the United States who want to launch a startup enterprise in North America but cannot get a green card in the United States. There are hundreds of thousands of some of the brightest minds from around the world, primarily they tend to be from Asian countries, who have done top degrees in the US. Many of them are able to get very attractive jobs for example, in the American information technology sector, but they're limited typically on what are called H-1B visas for 12 months, renewable H-1B visas. And unless they're lucky and they win the green card lottery, they cannot get the stability of permanent residency in the United States. We want to eat the Americans' lunch when it comes to competing for the best and the brightest. If they can't fix the problems in their broken immigration system, then we'll take these brilliant young people off their hands and invite them to come here and start a business in Alberta, create jobs right here. I want to go down to Silicon Valley and put up a billboard saying, if you have H-1B visa problems, come to Alberta, start up a business here. Lowest taxes, corporate taxes in North America shortly, no sales tax. Calgary was just voted the highest standard of living of any city in North America for the second straight year by The Economist magazine. And with our office vacancies in Calgary, you can darn near get free AAA office space downtown. And you're only if you need to fly down to visit your investors in Silicon Valley, we've got direct nonstops to San Francisco and San Jose, 2 hours away. And by the way, we'll get you a permanent resident visa and a bridging temporary resident visa if you want to start a business here and you qualify. I'm excited about how these bright young people could be the great drivers of innovation, wealth creation, job creation, and diversifying our economy. So I'm especially excited about this. We're talking about attracting the Mohammed Yassins when he came here in 1960-something.
1976.
1976. And he was just a kid straight out of university, and finished his university here. And we want more kids like him who are going to come here and succeed and create wealth. So those are 4 of the programs. Now, we typically get about 6,000 spots a year. So these will not be, as I say, fill up all of that space. We want input from Albertans about what else we should do to have a program that gives us the biggest economic bang for our buck. That's the goal that I've assigned to Minister Copy and Parliamentary Secretary Yassin. Would you like to complement any of that, Jason or Mohammed?
No, fully agree with you, Premier. Extremely excited and thank the Premier for giving us the opportunity, Mohammed and myself, to actually lead the consultations. And the consultation process will take part in really 3 streams. So the first is we're going to be reaching out to stakeholders. We'll be holding in-person meetings in 6 locations across the province over the next 6 weeks. That includes Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, and Lethbridge. We'll also be setting up a website, an opportunity for people who can't make those meetings to be able to provide their input, and as well for others who we haven't been able to reach out to and still want to provide their input in terms of how do we make our systems better. They can send direct emails to my office so we can get all the input to improve, not only make these programs work that the Premier spoke about, those 4 programs, but anything else, other economic streams that we can do, and then have this ready for rollout by the end of the year.
And what's by the end of the year? Okay, Mohammed, you would like to add anything?
Yeah. So thank you, Premier. So as a first step in this whole process was our passage of our Fair Registration Practices Act, and that was passed, and we have had over the summer a process of consultation on that, and through that we have heard a lot of comments and suggestions, and people are very happy. The newcomers here are very happy that got passed. So that was just kind of first, and now as we launch the larger process here, we are looking forward for more comments, more suggestions to make it effective and efficient, as Premier has just said.
Great. Happy to take your questions, folks.
So, my name is Jaehyun Kim from This Time, Korean ethnic media. And from our community, there are so many Koreans who really want to immigrate here, either some kind of business investment stream or something like that.
Mm.
And the first stream, the rural entrepreneur, it sounds like something like that, only for the rural location. So is there any limit to the business area or English level, English skills, or something like that?
We have not defined the program parameters yet. those decisions will be made partly based on the input we get in these consultations. We encourage the Korean and other communities to offer their thoughts on exactly that. I do know that in the Korean community, often the language requirements for economic immigration programs have been a barrier, and we will be mindful of that. We also know that there is significant interest, particularly from many Asian countries, for some form of investor immigrant program. I should point out, however, that the federal government does have certain parameters around what the provinces can do within their provincial nominee programs. And in that regard, Ottawa does not permit the provinces to develop what are called passive investment immigration schemes. Because these have been done in the past, unfortunately, there was a long history of fraud and abuse in the passive investment schemes. So we believe that our rural entrepreneur program would qualify as an active investment scheme. The difference is if the passive investment is just putting up
Just
money and getting permanent residency, whereas an active program requires the operation of a business. The government of British Columbia is operating on a pilot basis a rural entrepreneur stream, which is what inspired our proposal. So we'll be looking closely at the BC rural entrepreneur pilot as we develop ours. On the language requirement, again, the federal government does impose a standard Canada language benchmark of 3, I believe, for all PNP applicants. But that's a pretty basic standard. That's 3 out of, if I'm not mistaken, that's 3 out of 9, I think. Does anybody know the CLB system? So it's pretty much, it's fairly basic English. It doesn't require the same language proficiency as, say, the Federal Skilled Worker Express Entry Program. So that would be the minimum. And let's face it, to run a business in Alberta, you're going to have some basic English.
My question has 2 parts. First of all, I'm Jackie Dillon. I'm representing Punjabi National. My part A is that since you have put in place, a program where you are motivating or you are encouraging students to come over here and do post-graduation diplomas and certificates they get from here will be recognized. That's for one. And then we are in the process of encouraging them to go to the rural area and do the investments there to become entrepreneurs. So have we identified a few avenues and sectors where, like IT, maybe tourism or something like that, where we are going to specifically encourage them to invest? One. And second, will there be any support from the government on providing loans and something where we support their effort in running their business successfully?
Thank you. Great questions, Jaggi. On the first one, no, we have not yet identified specific industries. That is one of the reasons for the consultation, is to get that input. However, I do anticipate that immigrants coming through the student PR streams we've identified here, the foreign graduate startup visa and the international student entrepreneur program, will likely be going into disproportionately into the information technology related industries. So when we talk about startups, we're often talking about information technology, digital businesses, health sciences. So high tech, broadly speaking, tends to be the bulk of these startup businesses. So I expect that will be the focus in the student streams that we've identified. And in fact, these programs are inspired in part by the phenomenal success of the Chilean startup visa program, which is overwhelmingly in the IT, information technology sector. And as you know, India is very strong in that sector. With respect to loans, we won't be providing loans for businesses, but we will be helping provide loans for skill upgrading for newcomers to Alberta. That's part of our platform. It says that we will work with nonprofit groups like Windmill Microlending, formerly known as the Alberta Immigrant Access Fund, to expand access to low-interest loans to immigrant professionals who need bridge financing to upgrade their skills and pay for certification exams. So that's there is some financing available there. We'll be adding to it, but our government's philosophy is not to subsidize particular businesses because we don't think politicians are very good at making those decisions, but rather our philosophy is to create the best overall conditions for business to thrive, which is why we're cutting business taxes. Rishi ji.
Thank you, because I can talk of that thing only. So they charge hefty amounts from them and then they send them here. And then the 3 times fees are charged from them. And then the LMIAs are being sold to them.
Yeah.
And then exploitation at their jobs. They are paid less, and if they complain, then they are thrown out of their jobs.
Yeah.
So is there anything that these students will be taken care of?
Well, Rishi, I thank you for being so blunt about that. I'm aware of these forms of abuse. I think they're outrageous. When I was the federal immigration minister, brought in tougher penalties for these kinds of abuse, and we brought in the Cracking Down on Crooked Immigration Consultants Act to make it a clear legal offense to act as a consultant, as a non-registered consultant, for example, to deal with the problem of ghost consultants. I went to India on multiple occasions to press the Punjab State Police and the federal authorities to crack down on unscrupulous travel agents and immigration consultants who were taking money from students in particular on false pretense to get them visas and jobs and permanent residency in Canada. I regret that the problem continues. However, all of the enforcement powers reside in the federal government. So what I can commit to you is that we will be, at our level, rigorous about, first of all, one of the reforms I made was that the federal government will only issue study permits for post-secondary institutions that have been certified by the provinces as credible. And that cut out a lot of the fly-by-night ESL programs that were basically just operating as human smuggling operations for immigration fraud purposes. So there is some integrity, and I will encourage Minister Copping to work with the Minister of Advanced Education, Demetrios Nicolaides, to ensure that the only institutions that are nominating foreign students for study permits are credible post-secondary institutions that are not that are not engaged in the exploitation of foreign students. That's one thing we can do. And Jason, we should review the degree of cooperation between your department and IRCC, as well as the Canada Border Services Agency, to ensure that we are making them aware of any cases of fraud that are brought to our attention. But Rishi, enforcement, that's all a federal responsibility. I encourage people in the immigrant communities who are aware of situations like this to submit information to the CBSA. They have an anonymous tip line and an anonymous email account. And if people are aware of fraud happening, they should let CBSA know so they can commence an investigation. The federal government, as I said before, does impose certain mandatory requirements on provincial nominee programs. So a Canada language benchmark of English proficiency, of a basic proficiency. But beyond that, the province has quite a lot of latitude to select people. So I wouldn't say we're looking at lowering the threshold, but look at it this way. There's always more interest in immigrating to Canada and Alberta than we can accommodate. There's way more people who would like to come here than we can welcome or process in a given year. Given that, we can choose to be a little bit selective. And I'm simply saying that we will attribute, as a general rule, through the Rural Renewal Immigration Program, we will attribute greater weight to applicants who have shown an interest in living in smaller communities outside the two big cities. And let me say, a lot of that has already happened, particularly in the Filipino community. A lot of temporary foreign workers came here, went to smaller communities, worked there successfully, and their employers then sponsored them for an AINP permanent residency application on the condition that they would stay in those communities. And that has happened. That has happened in many, many cases. So we want to build on that success.
Thanks, Premier. For these four streams, it's really important, and thank you for doing that. However, we do have, I think, Uber and Skip Dishes and Pizza John's are filled with doctors, lawyers, engineers, and highly qualified people.
Exactly.
Is there any plan to use what we have already here and use them in the rural area beside the other four streams that we're talking about?
Well, yes.
Because
And
these are a burden now. They are so disengaged.
agreed. And that comes back to the whole, these two guys have two big, I've given them two big jobs. One is the Fairness for Newcomers Action Plan to help the doctors driving Uber, the engineers driving Skip the Dishes. And they've been doing consultations all summer on that. We brought in the Fair Registration Practices Act to address that issue. I'll be having the Premier Summit. We'll be increasing the availability of loans to upgrade skills, to get credentials recognized for those folks who are being underemployed. We'll be creating a mentorship program in the government of Alberta so that public servants can help walk those people through the certification process. We'll be expanding the International Qualifications Assessment Service of the government and a number of other measures. So that's all to move those underemployed professionals to working at their skill level. The other big task I've given these gentlemen is the Alberta Advantage Immigration Strategy. That's more about the newcomers who are not yet here and selecting those people who are most likely to make a significant contribution. And we're just saying we want to emphasize, not to the exclusion of urban immigration, but we want to emphasize more rural, smaller city immigration. And I would say to a lot of those folks who are, underemployed professionals in the big cities, there are labor shortages and skill shortages in the smaller communities. Think about moving out there. Take a look at that opportunity. And I can tell you, one of the things we're going to be saying to the medical doctors, I'm going to be breaking some news with right now. Hope Minister Chandra is not upset with me, but we're going to say to the medical doctors, we've got, apparently based on our billables to Alberta Health Services, a surplus of doctors in Calgary, but we have a deficit of doctors in many rural areas. So maybe if you're an immigrant doctor and you want a billing number, we're going to say to you, show us your commitment by practicing in a smaller community for a few years. Get them out there where the services are most needed. Let's be more logical about this. And I know I'll upset some people with that, but so be it. Yes, sir.
Hello, Vidya. I'm Jagjeet from Prime Asia TV. The fourth point, you have got foreign graduate status from United States. There are now universities across the world. So why only United States?
Good question. The answer is that, first of all, foreign student grads, foreign nationals who have graduated from universities all across the world are always welcome to apply and come to Canada, come to Alberta. The door is still open for them. But we're trying to address a very specific group. These are foreign students who went to U.S. universities with the hope and expectation of living permanently in the United States. And these are, by definition, some of the best of the best. These are kids who, for example, may have gone and gotten a scholarship at the Indian Institute of Technology and done their undergrad at that top university in South Asia. Then they got a scholarship and they went to MIT or Stanford. And in that group are going to be future Bill Gates, future Steve Jobs, future massive wealth creators. They cannot get their green cards in the United States. And now they're looking at going, but they want to live in North America, in a developed North American country, in many cases. And so I'm being very mercenary. I'll be honest, I'm being very mercenary about this. Other foreign student grads around the world can come, but these kids I've gone to some of the top universities on earth. They've proven that they have top English language skills. They have degrees that will be recognized. American degrees will automatically be recognized by Canadian universities. They've been integrated into a North American culture, which is so similar to Canada's. And they've got investors lined up to fund their startup business. The only thing they're missing is a green card. I'll give them the Alberta equivalent of a green card. So why am I doing this? Because I want to start a kind of Silicon Valley in Canada, and it's those young minds that are going to do it. That's why I'm focused on that. And we might look at broadening it beyond that. But let's start. We've got a couple 100,000 of these young people in the U.S. right now. To be clear, these are not Americans. These are foreign student grads of U.S. universities. So there's nothing. They tend overwhelmingly to be from developing countries. Not exclusively, but overwhelmingly from Asian countries. And we're just saying, you're hitting a brick wall on their broken immigration system down there. We're going to make it work for you up here. Go ahead.
So thank you very much, Premier, for organizing this roundtable with media. And you are master of immigration, has a long history in immigration, and using a very good tool to taking head-on with the American system, because they are just under the new governmentship. There, a lot of people are suffering there, which you are taking very good initiative to bring them over here. At the same time, there we have 570,000 students studying in Canada right now.
Wow.
And we can get most of them over here because we have very less number in Alberta basically.
Yeah, Alberta universities have done much less in foreign student than other provinces.
So I think it's great, like in the coming years we will see under your premiership and leadership lot of new changes in the immigration system, and hopefully Alberta will be great again. Just like
To coin a phrase. Well, thank you for that. And our platform does as well include encouraging Alberta universities to do a better job of recruitment. I'll give you one good example. My good friend Bob Dillingy has donated, I think, $20 million to the University of Lethbridge to create the Dillon School of Business with a much greater focus on practical entrepreneurial skills. And as part of that, he's encouraging them to do smarter recruitment of qualified, we're not talking about the nonsense that happens, but the qualified people to come in.
That's good.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, it's Vina Brooks from AfroXTV.
Good to see you again.
Thank you, Premier. I wanted to find out with regards to the this program, will it also apply to the business people who want to come and invest
Yes. Yes.
from other countries?
Well,
And what are the rules?
so one of the 4 proposed programs, the Rural Entrepreneurial Immigration Program, is exactly for business people, and the rules will be developed following the consultations that start tonight. However, we may create another or several other entrepreneurial business programs. I'm looking forward to the report from Mr. Yassine, Mr. Kopping, based on these consultations. So people think we should have some other kinds of entrepreneurial programs. We'll be listening to that. But right now, the one we ran on in the election was for immigrants who want to buy or start a rural business. We're prepared to give them a 2-year temporary visa and bridging into permanent residency if they've proven their good faith.
Thank you.
Simon, how are you? It's been too long, Frank. How are you?
I know.
Are you representing media, Frank? Are you representing media?
Yes, I'm actually today representing all the media.
Oh, great.
Of course, all the international foreign communities, especially like my community. Thank you for being today, Mr. Premier, Mr. Secretary, and Mr. Minister. So my question is 2 parts. So now we have these 4 great programs. So once say this U.S. tenants, we bring them here, the future Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. So how can we make sure that we keep them here like for the next 5-10 years once they become successful, once they become a Canadian citizen? Because we can keep them.
That's a good question, because you know as well as I do that many in the Chinese community in particular who came here and got their PR, went back to China because of better economic opportunities or more interesting opportunities, perhaps. You know, I always say, you know, you get some bright kid here from China and he graduates with his MBA at a Canadian university, and maybe his entry-level job here is working for $60,000 for a bank, or he can go back to the family business in China and yeah, work 100 hours a week but become a millionaire, right? So it's a faster moving economy there for sure. But the answer, Frank, the answer is economic growth. It's prosperity that largely attracts newcomers, and it's prosperity that will encourage them to stay. And so that's why our government's fixation is economic growth and job creation. Let's be honest, you know as well as I do, you know this very well. We have thousands and thousands of Calgarians who immigrated here 5, 10, 15 years ago. Many of them did pretty well during the up years as petroleum engineers and geologists and so forth. And many of those folks are now driving Uber, metaphorically speaking. You know, they're now underemployed. And, you know, we've got to get those people back to work because we're losing some of them too, aren't we? Some of these people who came here in their 30s with great degrees, got their credentials recognized, got to work in downtown Calgary energy businesses in many cases, and are now 2, 3, 4 years unemployed, underemployed. And I'll be honest, some of them are even more frustrated because, like Yassine Mohammed knows a lot of these folks who have been laid off by engineering firms who are now contracting out their engineering work to the countries that they came from. Yeah. That's true. And it's painful. There's nothing we can do to stop that because we don't have a law, we don't have any legal authority to stop a company from contracting out engineering work. So we need the strong economy to get all of them back to work at their skill level here.
First of all, thank you, Premier, for doing this. I know your office is getting now into habit of reaching out to diverse communities and ethnic communities. Question, if I could just add a little bit to the same question my colleague asked, the retention. I know we're attracting people overseas, but what happens is after a few years they end up being in big cosmopolitan cities, Vancouver, Toronto, or other places. Is there anything we can do as a province? And second question is, when can we expect this program up and running?
The answer on the first question is that Manitoba is a great example of success in retaining rural immigrants. I'll give you an example in our platform. There's a town called Morden, Manitoba, about an hour outside of Winnipeg, whose population has gone from about 4,000 to 9,000 in the past 15 years because of immigration strategy like this. And how did they retain those people? By the local community worked with the provincial government to provide very strong social support for them upon arrival. So basically, the local community, all of the groups, the nonprofits, the charities, the churches, the town administration, the local businesses, all saw that they had a responsibility to welcome the newcomers, to make them feel that this was their new home, to make sure their kids were doing well in school, to make sure that they were resolving any bureaucratic problems with the government, to make sure if they lost a job, they would find another one quickly. And so Morden, Manitoba is an object lesson of a success in attracting and retaining new immigrants to a rural community. They've done it all across Manitoba. So I've asked Minister Copping to closely study the success in immigrant retention in rural areas in Manitoba. Second question, when will it be implemented?
We'll finalize the strategy by the end of the year, and then we'll take a look at that point in time in terms of what legislative changes that we need. So it'll be in 2020, we'll actually pull the trigger on the legislative changes if required, which will likely be the case.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just talking about attracting the entrepreneurs to the rural area. But my question is, the entrepreneur go to the big city to start their business for a reason, because there are more people. The population is playing a really critical role in starting a business, especially a small business. So my question is maybe the government maybe should have some financial or policy support for those guys who want to start
Well,
their business.
you know
in
what?
rural
We'll
area.
consider that. My request to Jason and Mohammed, look at how Manitoba, BC, and other provinces have done this. How do we replicate the settlement support that rural immigrants receive? Do we need any other incentives to retain them out in those communities? But, sir, I just believe that given the vast number of people who would like to immigrate to Canada, again, we can afford to put some priority on those willing to go and buy a rural business. And by the way, I know in the Korean community, for example, many of these people have saved up money and they would be willing to go and buy a turnkey business. And those businesses are out there. A lot easier for an immigrant to do that than start a business from scratch in Canada where they don't understand the legal system or the commercial system. There are businesses being run by people in their 70s and 80s in rural Alberta. They can't find buyers. They're offering to sell these businesses at a steep discount. They are profitable turnkey businesses. And we're talking about acting as a dating agency, as it were, between the prospective immigrant and the sellers of these rural businesses. So, because if that hardware store goes out of business in that small town, it's not coming back, and the whole town will lose as a result. But if that hardware store is making a decent profit and it's a turnkey business and they can sell it to an immigrant family from China, from Korea, from Africa, what a beautiful solution that is, in principle. But they might need other support. We're going to look at what other support to give them.
On behalf of the urban media groups inviting us here, I would like to say thank you, Mr. Jason Hopping Yasin, and your staff and your office. My question is that in your speech you said that
500, I think, is our current allotment under the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program. That quota is allocated by Immigration Refugee Canada, IRCC. I don't have any. Is the federal government increasing that slightly by a couple of hundred or something?
Yeah, but it's not,
So there might be a small increase, maybe sort of like a 3-4% increase coming up. But that's not a new tranche of immigrants. That's the same annual number we've been able to select the last few years. Thanks. I'll come back to you. Let me get.
Hi, Premier. Actually, I just want to introduce myself. I am Avneet Teja from Prime Asia TV. This is first interaction with you because I just moved from Toronto.
Oh, welcome to Alberta.
Thank you very much.
We've got to get you a blue turban.
Oh, thank you. So it's very good to see you in this shape, and you are doing whatever you're doing for immigration. So because I moved from Toronto to Alberta because my kids, they are in grade 12 and grade 10. So hopefully they are in good province and their future is bright.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, good luck in Alberta. Great to have
thank
you
very
here.
much.
Last question.
Yeah, my follow-up question is, once a person is approved, do you know approximately how long it takes from the beginning to the end?
Well, right now it's moving too slow. And what's your average processing time on AINP right now? Do you know?
sorry, I don't know that.
I think it's about 18 months now, and that's largely the federal portion. So what happens is Alberta selects the immigrant, nominates them to the federal government, and we can do that fairly quickly. My instruction is that we speed up the Alberta portion, but then the federal government has to do the security and health checks, and that takes time, and that takes them too long right now. So one of the instructions I've given to Ms. Jason and Mohammed is, how do we make this thing move as quick as possible? Because the faster you can connect somebody, like if you find this African family that wants to come and buy that business in rural Alberta, they can only wait so long. And I think in many cases, these families will put applications in with Australia and Britain and other countries, and they'll see which one comes through first. Well, I'm very competitive. I don't want to lose the best people, so I want us to move faster. Folks, with that, I want to thank you for your good questions. The Minister of PS and I have to greet our invitees as we prepare for the town hall that will begin at 7 o'clock, which you are welcome to cover. It's an open public event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.